Hello, everyone. This is Jose Herrera with the O3X6 Series podcast, and with me, my hermano Tyler Pollock. Today's special guest is Jacqueline Jones. Before beginning today's session, I'd like to share a little bit about Jackie with you all. Jackie owns and operates Flourish Momentum, integrative health and wellness for mind, body, soul, space. She draws on her professional experience in education, art therapy, yoga, meditation, integrative nutrition, health coaching, energy healing, and feng shui to offer proprietary blend of services to holistically support clients to optimize all-around wellness. Jackie holds multiple degrees and certifications. In 2011, she began providing clinical art therapy, first to pediatric oncology and hematology patients at Georgetown University Hospital. And in 2012, she began working with active duty service members in rehabilitative treatments for the invisible wounds of war, such as traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, and chronic pain at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. In 2021, she launched her private practice, Flourish Momentum, to work with clients using a full-spectrum holistic approach that addresses mind, body, soul, and space to achieve and maintain desired wellness goals. She works therapeutically with clients one-on-one, as well as therapeutic groups and wellness events to nonprofit, for-profit, and governmental organizations in a variety of contexts to support the needs of staff or clientele. She has researched, published, and presented nationally and internationally on program development and evaluation of clinical art therapy to treat TBI and PTSD in military populations, as well as utilizing art therapy to treat complicated and disenfranchised grief among military service members. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Semper Fidelis.
When I was young, I always gravitated toward art. So I was someone who, in kindergarten, when they said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I knew even back then I wanted to be an art teacher. I would always do art before going to bed at night. And then through adolescence, I really came to rely on art. So when I was dealing with anything emotional, I knew that if I made art about it, or if I just made art in general, it would soothe me, but it wasn't just grounding. It would kind of give me the time and space to see something from another person's perspective, or to feel into empathy for someone else who, I may not have if I hadn't created that time and space to make art about it. So I learned pretty early on that I could rely on art to keep me grounded, and that it was always a safe space for me, and that there was a link between art and psychology. So when I was maybe in high school at some point, I was in a used bookstore and I was following the things I was interested in. And so I was following art, I was following psychology, and those two sections came together at one book. They had like a one book art therapy section. So I took that home, I read it, and it just resonated really deeply with me. I went to school initially. I have a master's in art education. So I wanted to do that because there's such huge value in art, and we see it across culture, we see it across time, but we lose sight of that here, I think. And so, I wanted to help kids, especially in the age where they start to get turned away from art because of stigmas associated with it. So for a lot of reasons, I wanted to become an art teacher. I also wanted to be an art therapist. My family was worried I wouldn't get a job because at the time, if you looked it up, like there were no jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people who love me dissuaded me from pursuing art therapy, even though in the back of my mind that was always my plan. But I agreed that education was a smart stepping stone, and I wanted that experience too. So I wound up getting a master's in art education. And while I was doing that, I did a lot of volunteer work. So, like big brothers, big sisters, and through my college, provided art and reading for kids after school in counties that had cut art programs out of their schools. And I lived in Brazil for a while working with homeless kids and using art. But when I was there, actually, I had an art education approach. And I just remember leaving that experience wishing that I had the knowledge of an art therapist when I was there doing that. So I became an art teacher in Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia. And it was an amazing experience. But because I care about the psychology part of like the psychological connection in art, it was just apparent to me when red flags were coming up in kids' artwork. And it wasn't my role to process whatever was coming up. I had to pass it off to a guidance counselor. And then I wasn't allowed, like, that was the end of the lane for me. I wasn't allowed to know what was coming up or why. And I understand that, but also as the art teacher, I was the one that created the space and facilitated that expression. So it just, I understood that role in that setting, but it made me know that I wanted to be able to go deeper with people. So I went back to school for a master's in art therapy. I went to GW, which I chose intentionally because they had a really strong research part of the program, and they also had a really strong trauma part of the program. And it was important to me to be able to get into research to really show people why this matters and the unique value of art therapy, and to be able to communicate it to communities that should better understand the value. And also at that time, like even all around Instagram right now, everyone is taking short classes and things to become trauma informed. At that time, it was new to have a program that was so deeply rooted in trauma, and so we took a lot of extra credits for it. We hosted our own community art therapy clinic at the school that was rooted in trauma focused issues, and so it was a really big component of the program. From there, so when I left teaching, the PTO president told me his like helpful word of advice when I was leaving was no matter what you do, because he knew I was going to go pursue art therapy. He said, no matter what you do, don't work with adult men. They're not going to understand this. They're not going to appreciate it.
Wow.
And and so that was a challenge to me. My at GW, you have 2 full year-long internships. My first full year-long internship was working with kids with cancer at Georgetown Hospital. And that was important to me at the time. I had a student who had cancer, and that motivated me a lot to want to pursue this first particular internship. And I'm really glad I did, and we can get into it later, but it's come full circle into my life. Like that year-long experience has shown up as being just invaluable for my life in general. But the second year-long internship, I chose to work at NICO. So I really pursued that. When I went to interview, I got such a good, just such a deep sense of how powerful art therapy was in the setting there. And it was so funny on the day of the interview. I just remember like going from the PTO president saying, whatever you do, don't work with adult men, to going to interview at NICO and just watching this group of like 5 special operators like towering over the petite art therapist, but just like just in awe of the work that they were doing in that setting, was really powerful. So for a few other personal reasons, I wound up working there for a year. And fortunately, that year is when the they got funding. The Fallen Heroes Fund got funding to start breaking ground on 10 satellites around the country. So the year I was an intern at NICO, they broke ground at Fort Belvoir, and they were going to be opening their first outpatient satellite setting a year later. And even though the art therapy was so powerful at NICO, initially they were not going to have art therapy as part of their program. But I wrote a program proposal to the National Endowment for the Arts, and I went and I presented to the leadership at Belvoir and showed them the value of art therapy in that setting. And basically the NEA funded me to do a pilot, and Belvoir agreed to give me a room. And so I had 3 months to dive in and prove the worth of the art therapy in that setting. And I did. And then it became a full year contract through the NEA. But even before that was done, the DoD saw how powerful it was, and I had a GS position within a year. So,
Wow.
yeah, and it's takes a lot to happen when it's DoD and a few different government organizations working together, and then at a joint force base like that, and then in a hospital. There's so many levels of bureaucracy, but the value of what was being offered, it just punctured through all that, accelerated everything. From there, we were able to build the program more, brought on another art therapist and a music therapist, and then got involved in the community a lot. From there, I moved on, and I can further explain why, but from there, I moved on to Eglin Air Force Base 5 years later, when the Air Force finally opened their first satellite. And there I got to be the art therapist and the yoga and meditation teacher. So I got to build both of those programs there. I left that in 2020 to take care of my mom. She was diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer at the beginning of the pandemic. So that was one reason I'm really glad I had all the knowledge from Georgetown. So I was her caregiver for a year. And in that time, pursued a bit more education and things that, well, number one, especially when I was teaching yoga, a lot of my clients would ask me about health related things, but that wasn't my lane. So I would refer them to people who it was, but I used that time and taking care of my mom to get certified in integrative nutrition health coaching. So that could become a bit more my lane. And then there were things, and we can get into it more as we go, but art therapy is great. And then of course it has a limit. And then yoga and meditation come in and kind of fill that limit. And then that's great, but it has a limit. And then that's where the energy work, like Reiki and feng shui, can come in and fill that limit. So in my personal life, I had already been like progressing my own self-care accordingly, and then getting trained in, and then sharing those things with my clients as well. So by now I offer, when I work with people, I instead of saying I'm an art therapist and a yoga and meditation teacher and a health coach and a energy healer and a feng shui practitioner, it's such a mouthful. So
Yeah.
people refer to me. I ask my clients, what do you call me when you talk about me? They're like, you're my holistic therapist. I'm like, okay, we'll go with that. That sums it all up.
You're a sensei. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been
That's
called
cool.
that before.
Yeah.
So anyway, when I work with people now, I bring that all in.
That's awesome. That's wow. Yeah, I can have a couple of questions. Um First, I empathize with you with your mom. My mom died of lung cancer back when I was 18. Back then it was on the 0506 time frame. There wasn't really
Okay.
much, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was brutal. I'm working through that now, just partly because I was literally transitioning out of high school into the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
It's like not to bring anything up, but like I don't really remember that time frame that much.
Uh-huh.
The only time like I remember my mom is when I dream of her. And that's like every so often. And it's like a weird dream. And it's always the same dream. It's like I find her and she's
Uh-huh.
living this whole other life. And she has this whole complete different family. And I go up to her and I'm like, Mom, where have you been? And
Uh-huh.
she won't like talk to me at all. It's like weird. Um, but I'm laughing at it because it's not true, right? That's not a I don't know where
Right.
that's coming from, but that's part of working, I guess the idea of working with broken men, right? It's like you don't have the proper infrastructure or the community resources in order to deal with that. These are the outcomes or potential outcomes that are going to manifest later in life. And for me, that's one of those
Mm-hmm.
components that is funky. So I'm still working through that. But I do empathize with your mom. The other question I have is how are you basing your or how are you measuring outcomes with art therapy or just your programming? That's got to be tough, especially with DoD type frameworks.
Yeah. Great question. First, sorry to hear about your mom. I empathize with that. And there's actually a lot of things that we can do to help work with those dreams and do some mining for meaning there. So when I was working within the DoD to prove the value of what I was doing, I hit the ground running with pre-questionnaires, post-questionnaires, and then there were two different time points along the way when I would work with people that I would give them a different survey or questionnaire and kind of gather information along the way. I had different levels of work that I did when I worked with people. So they'd start in level 1 groups with me. And then if they wanted to continue, they'd go into deeper level 2 groups. If they wanted to continue, they can move into an open studio and or one-on-one work. And that's where we would do the deeper trauma processing.
Mhm.
And then in the outpatient setting, I would work with some people for a month. I worked with other people for 4 years. So there was a lot of range there, but the information, well, first coming from a background in art therapy and doing learning research in an art therapy school, a lot of science tries to do research off of really objective measures. Art is so subjective. So we had to really learn how to study subjective things. And I was, always trying to gather data that would satisfy people who wanted the quantitative numbers and values and things, and then also get to the real meat of what was coming up in sessions, which is more like photos and people's descriptions of their artwork and that kind of thing. But a powerful part of the survey at the end, I had listed all of the main symptoms of TBI and PTSD, and then the clients would rank, they would rate their own. So every symptom was on a scale, and they'd rate their improvement in that symptom based on the work that they did in art therapy. So through that, we could see that the top symptoms that were addressed were being able to experience positive emotions again, improvements of feeling depressed or sad, improvements of feeling isolated, and a decrease in guilt and shame. And so these were really important symptoms that a lot of the other modalities were not really able to reach.
Mhm.
Um, so that was really powerful. And now that I work by myself, it means my client pool is smaller. Um, and so now when I present, like I did, the most recent presentation I did was for an international feng shui school on using feng shui to address intergenerational trauma. And really, I'm right now doing mostly subjective. So I don't really have the numbers to be able to gather a ton of like numerical data, but that's okay. I'm kind of doing the more ground level exploratory type research where you're gathering what everyone is saying about their experience and what it's addressing and how it's working. And then when I work with like each individual, we track progress by I have there's like a dozen categories of facets of life, and I have them rate their satisfaction with them and give reasons why. And then for people who work with me for an extended period of time, about every 3 months, we kind of revisit that and check in, and it helps people see how far they've come, because people lose sight of that when they're themselves kind of trucking along. But it also allows us to keep fine tuning our exact direction.
Have you integrated any type of like neurobiology or neuroscience where you're actually going in, testing blood, getting maybe some measurements for biomarkers, maybe some changes in brain functioning?
I would love to. So I'm right now that I'm outside of the DoD and I don't have like the whole team of people I can collaborate with that stuff anymore. Um, I would love to find people that
Yeah,
would partner with me. I mean, I don't have all that equipment, but that would be fabulous.
yeah, that's right now what well, I've been doing a very large project. Um, it's maybe we'll probably get into this a little bit later. I would like to get your opinion in just terms of technology versus like the holistic approach. It seems to me that the case right now is that there's this wanting of a biological reset through
Mm-hmm.
changing technological algorithms. And I think that's hubris, partly because there are base predispositions, whether that's social determinants of health, ACEs, epigenetic, genetic, compositions, and just environments, right, that are very, very toxic. It seems to me that attempting to manipulate human weather, which is already out of balance as a result of the infrastructure, um,
Mm-hmm.
that these mechanisms of either one limiting or censoring or changing grammar fields to restore balance is it's just hubris. It's a joke. Like you can't do that. Which is kind of like my beef with technology today and a lot of the things that we're still finding as a result of not understanding biology and the brain all
Mm-hmm.
in one. Um, but yeah, that's something that I've been working on, at least whenever I work with individuals who are seeking to want to get from point A to point B with whatever it is that they're going through. And I always tell them, let's start with your blood work, and then from there we'll go on with your pattern biometrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are you sleeping? What's your sleep like? What's your nutrition intake like? And then from there we can move on to other ways to try to mitigate whatever it is that they're going through. And I mean, it's a long-term project, but the end state is to turn that into a hybrid program where you're integrating some type of machine learning that optimizes continuously
Mm-hmm.
um, for for the individual, despite aging, despite environmental changes, whether that's in the digital scape, whether it's in the physical environment, and then just accounting for those things so that they're not actually having to wait. So, for example, like blood work, right? Why
Mm-hmm.
should you wait an entire year to get your blood work? Then you find out, oh my goodness, I have a discrepancy within a certain area, right? pre-diabetic or something like that,
Hmm.
when you could have been handling all those issues prior if you had a continuous information loop. And
Right.
so there's a level of engineering that has to take place, at least with like policy side of things, and then kind of the more innovative side of things. But there's a massive push against, well, we get a lot of doomsday um, information with like AI. And I'm learning a lot. Like I'm taking some courses. They're non-degree seeking courses, but the individuals that are teaching the courses, they're actually the architect. Well, one of them is the architect of artificial intelligence, like back in the the early '90s, and she now oversees and understands what these LLMs are doing and whatnot. And she has a different scope of how artificial intelligence actually benefits humankind rather than this doomsday scenario. Um, and that gets into some of the I don't know if you ever read any Hugo de Garis. Hugo de Garis wrote a book called The Artilect War, where someday in the future, there's going to be two types of humans. One is going to be the Terrans, and one's going to be the Cosmists. And the Cosmists, you can think of them as like the transhumanists, like the epitome of a transhumanist, right? Just completely wanting to go into the stars, completely be enhanced. But the Terrans, they want to stay on Earth and they want to maintain a level of, I guess, balance with the technology that they're integrating into their lives. And as a result of this kind of like, I guess this conflict, there's this huge war that takes place, and they call it the Artilect War, where Gigadeath, death by the billions, is introduced, and then essentially whoever wins that war is how humanity will end up. Um, but those are, I can't say that that's not going to happen, but it seems that these narratives are creating these futures in some weird way. So that's kind of like the I view everything through a biological model. I like looking at things through a biological model,
Hmm.
even though we have massive integration with technology. And I think that if we can't overrule one with the other. I think they both have to be in sync with one another in order to get what we need to be. But that's kind of like the hope, right? Is like the more we decentralize technologies, the better we are able to implement within a smaller locality or within our own communities. And that's kind of like the idea behind a term that I use called biocognitive infrastructure,
Uh-huh.
where we have like a full integration of a whole host of resources, whether that's how a region is set up, what's natural to the region, how organizations and for profits conduct human development and optimization, with whether it's a capitalist or a post-capitalist framework. And we haven't really done that partly. I don't know. I really don't know why. It just seems that there's this like American idea that is like everything is work, 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 and
Hmm.
and you can't. I mean, for good reasons, right? And I think that maybe that's kind of like with this upcoming generation, they're beginning to see that it's just not work, work, work. I mean, there's a difference in types of work, right? There's a work ethic and then there's actual work. And I think if we don't capitalize in the sense of modifying the right frame of view for younger populations to understand work ethic and what is work and what is actually quality of life, then we're going to miss the point and we're going to be in a pretty bad spot here in the next 20 years, especially as we see geopolitical tensions take place, inflation rates, supply chains and logistical chains just plummet and stopped. And so I think setting up through decentralized mechanisms that are centralized with mission and intent would benefit communities and individuals and groups that seem to be hit hardest or have been hit
Hmm.
hardest. It would do them a lot more good rather than harm. And again, that's just competing with, I guess, people who were organizations that have, specific agendas or how to actually regulate certain things. And yeah, sorry, I talked a lot there, but
No, that's okay. And what I'm thinking when you're talking is just that each client is like a microcosm of that, right? Especially we'll take service members who are part of military medical system where they're quickly given meds for different things, right? But then, it's interesting because when I worked in the Intrepid centers, and it's active duty service members and in military hospitals, and then now that I'm working on my own, I work with a lot of veterans, and a handful of them are people who I knew in the past who found what I was doing now and reconnected, and wanted to work with me, saying it's just such an important part of their healing before. But it's just like I'm thinking of someone in particular who was put on certain medications while they were in the military, still on them now, we'll say a decade later, but has become interconnected with them. It kind of lost personal sense of power along the way, like has developed a sense of feeling like, well, who am I if I'm not on these meds? Can I trust myself if I'm not on these meds? And so I've helped a lot of people transition. I understand the value of getting on medication, especially when it's to stabilize something acute. But then a lot of people are put on these acute stabilizers forever. And issue with that is that it kind of, if it's sleep meds, then you can't remember your dreams, so you don't know what you need to be processing in therapy. Or if it's like a mood stabilizer, then you kind of lose sight of your natural emotions about a particular thing. So you lose sight of what you should be processing in therapy. And so it's like a seesaw that I work with a lot of clients on when they don't want to be reliant on external substances, and they'll talk to their prescribers and say, like, which one would it be appropriate to start with? Which one do I not really need anymore? And then they'll come down off of that. At the same time that they're coming down off of that, they start to have more intense emotions about things that they really had just gotten numb from the med. Like the issue never went away. It just, you can feel it more now that something's not suppressing the intensity of your emotions about it. And so like as they're coming down off the med, then we're able to use the information of what's coming up, what's triggering you in your daily life right now. What are the underlying beliefs that may like hit you harder than you would have realized when you were on a medication? And then that's perfect information for us to take and process through. And then in the end, you have people who are empowered because they know they can trust themselves to handle whatever may present in a day. And it also is freeing, to know that you can emotionally regulate without substances, or to feel your full spectrum of emotions without them. So I don't know, it was kind of like a micro level of what I was thinking about when you were talking. And another thing I really like about the direction I've gone with all this holistic stuff is some of the issues you were saying, like we can get so far out of balance with progress that we lose sight of progress from thousands of years ago. Like part of my feng shui studies is geomancy. And that was the study of learning where to set up a civilization so that you would be in the most optimal harmony with the earth. Like where would the community naturally get the resources it needed? How would it need to set up to not obliterate the earth it was on? And so this is all ancient wisdom that a lot of people lost sight of, that if we just, reintegrate into our daily lives, I think we can find the balance of what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've posed this to a large group of people over a period of time. Like how would you get a McDonald's to adopt? a framework like that, right? Like, and that's, I mean, that's what we're up against.
Hmm.
And I often say this as well, we're depending on, the rise of transnational billionaires, billionaires have become more powerful than actual governments. They produce more GDP, you know, in some way I like to view myself not as a consumer. Um, and I think that they have to begin to adopt this idea that, okay, humans are not consumers, right? They're not these things that just take up resources, but instead the best thing that they can do, and this is what I'm shooting for, is to view humans as critical infrastructure, because
Hmm.
this rapid integration into this digital realm, where now all of a sudden a person can have, a mass impact on a group of populations, raises a scale of risk assessment, of threat assessment, and then impact. And when you don't have the proper, infrastructure and support, community resources, nor the organizations that, or the institutional viability to harmonize or even keep that in balance, then you're looking at a catastrophe waiting to happen. And and that's why, well, that's entropy, right? That's complete disorganization within an organized state. And we're
Hmm.
seeing that across, we've seen that across, the past decade with a whole host of things that have taken place. And again, there's this idea that, oh, we're just gonna get the Zuckerbergs and the Musk and the Dorseys to change their algorithms and everything's gonna be good to go. And then we're gonna do, regulation on grammar field where we're gonna cut out certain words. And then if we cut out those certain words, the entire narrative is gonna be shut down. But doing so, we end up basically revising entire histories. Like, for example, if I go on Midjourney, are you familiar with like the AI art generators?
Um, I have not been on mid. I played with the word generators. I have not played with the art generators yet.
The art generators are cool, just because you can produce them. Like right now, I've been working on creating coloring books, and you have to be very, very specific. Like, for example, I'll put in a prompt, and it'll give me a great piece of art. But then, like the rifle, for example, will have like three scopes, and
Uh-huh.
so you have to like keep modifying it. They're amazing. But what I'm getting at is like the grammar field, right? So if I input a prompt that says, like, for example, I like doing like religious like art generator like prompts. So I'll put in like the Virgin Mary. All of a sudden, I'll get a red flag, and it'll say appeal. The community standards have flagged you for putting in this word because they think I'm going to use it in a negative way, but
Uh-huh.
so I can't even use the word the Virgin Mary, or the word virgin, as a result of entire grammar field and this and massive debiasing programs,
Hmm.
because it's going to cause potential harm. And so if we keep rooting out those types of words and frameworks, it's going to be that much more difficult for population to begin to understand things like feng shui, or
Hmm.
even just how humans used to operate. And it seems to be more and more the case as we go into this like progression.
Hmm.
So again, I think at the policy level there hasn't been an integration of how adversarial impacts and the public health model, or at least a mental health model, or what I would call the health and security environment, is completely integrated, where we actually show full proof how it integrates, how it actually works, what are the potential impacts and outcomes of why populations are being impacted the way they are, and this is what is happening. Um, and I've tried that before. I did it in a little experiment where I targeted certain politicians, and I got some leeway, but the language and the models were so far ahead of time that they weren't registering, because it's like for example, North Carolina has around 2,600,000 people that don't have access to any type of mental health support. There
Hmm.
are there are 28 counties that don't have access to a single psychologist. And the governor just recently passed earlier this year a $1.5 billion proposal to basically come in and begin providing some type of mental health relief for these communities that have been hit the hardest. And all it is increasing funding to get distributed so that people can go into their health insurance plans and seek out mental health professionals. But the problem is it takes almost 8 years to, for someone to get that and
Yeah.
all the certificates and continuing education. And then you got to destigmatize, right? So we're talking about rural counties that don't look at mental health the way we might look at it. So
Mm-hmm.
there's that part of it. And there's just been this underutilization of mental health, or this idea of mental health in the state, that yes, we're thankful that they're finally looking at it that way, but it might be a little too late. And that funding isn't going to be forever, right? We're, not to get too political in this, but we're sending $113 billion to Ukraine to provide them aid, and that's going to cost every American household $900.
Mm-hmm.
Why not put that money into the health and security environment here in the United States, which is sorely needed? And again, I understand what's happening in Ukraine. I understand all that, but it seems that there are a lot of things that are leading up to a disaster. Like, for example, it's not just the funding that's being pumped out over there, it's all our stockpiles that are being depleted. And we have no manufacturers to produce that here. And it takes years to produce and
Mm-hmm.
refill those stocks. So I don't, again, bureaucracy, right? How do we actually look at this in real time to, to actually do some good out of it? But again, going back to the whole trauma informed, I think about a year ago, I got certified under the Trauma Resource Institute, just to begin introducing the biological model with the students and the faculty and the school districts that I work in. And it's amazing. There's so many people that don't know what ACEs are. They don't know anything about
Mm-hmm.
social determinants of health. And these are educators that are working with, parents and students that come from very impacted communities, not just from the environment, but just as a result of like the natural disasters that keep on reoccurring. And when we talk about like school to prison pipelines, that's exactly what we're doing, because we're still in this like discipline and punish mode, where restorative practices, holistic approaches to mental health, or even just curriculum in general, is not being implemented. And again, I mean, I can't fix that personally. Um, that's a whole of society effort. But again, not to get too bleak, but that's the hope, at least with commercializing certain technologies, to have access and actually have greater impact. And I think that's what's cool about like Web 3.0. Like there's some folks that view Web 2.0, this kind of like profit incentivized approach to social networking and networking in general. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the collapse of humankind, just because look at what the social media platforms did, right? Everything was profit based, and that profit base, it distorted a lot of people's views. And here we are, Web 3.0, all this decentralization. It's a little scary, yeah, depending on how people may weaponize the certain things, but it's also going to allow, at least and hope, that creative mind to go ahead and step forward and say, this is what this is maybe how we should approach certain things, and it'll catch on fire. But you would have to change a lot of culture within some of these platforms. Instagram is a great tool, but it's also very it has its downfalls with the constant content and the spectacle that comes with it. Um,
Well, and like I can't even boost my posts that talk about what I do, because if you talk about like any of my posts that say what holistic modalities I do, and even if I say the perceived benefits, even if I'm not making a claim like Reiki will heal your TBI, even if I don't say a direct claim like that, even if it's just like, here are some perceived benefits that clients have reported after Reiki or art, whatever. I can't boost any of that. I get flagged for making false claims.
Yeah.
You just can't, I mean, and it's, I do like the most, gentle, holistic, like, and I can't boost it. And I
Oh,
can't, it's also funny because my posts that do best with this community are the ones using their words, right? So if I have a post that's like, what is this hippie shit? Like that, those are the ones that people read and resonate with, but I can't boost them. I can't even like put asterisks because then I get flagged for, we know you're like covering up a curse word. And so,
Wow.
yeah.
yeah,
That's I think that's the negativity bias. Humans like going to the negative stuff first.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, I got a question about your feng shui. Now that is that does it have to deal with atmospherics, right? Like you set up a certain type of environment so that it impacts your like your sensory perception.
Yes.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, basically. So it's the art and science of working with the energy in your environment. So if have you had acupuncture before?
No, but they keep telling me to do it.
Okay, so in traditional Chinese medicine, we have all of these energy channels, meridian lines in our body, and um, they so the needles basically wherever you have a stagnant point or a blockage or something, the needles go and free that so the energy can then move freely again. That is essentially what we're doing in a home or a business or a space when we're using feng shui. There are some schools that have gotten, I don't want to, they still work, but they like apply the same formula per household, so it's easier to share and disseminate. But the kind that I'm trained in is the more classical traditional feng shui, which uh, it's there's like a mathematical scientific component of it where you're figuring out exactly how the energy is resting in someone's particular space based on how the house is positioned and facing and where it's located geographically and all these things. And then you lay the floor plan down over that and you can figure out where, and everything is yin and yang. So there, half the energies are helpful and half the energies are hurtful. They call them auspicious or inauspicious. And so, um, then you work with the space to bolster or enhance the ones that are good for you and in support of your goals. But it's a lot of categories: health, wellness, family, finances, abundance, travel, like any life category you can think of is affected by this. And then half the energies are the inauspicious ones that we make recommendations so that people can neutralize. So I mean, you can address anything, like fertility issues will show up, divorce will show up, like the oldest brother having a particular body issue will show up. I mean, it's really powerful. So that anyway, yeah, that's what it is. And it's a really important part of what I bring in because especially working in these intensive outpatient settings where people were given, modalities across the board to work on their internal physical and mental health. But then so often we would get feedback that they were frustrated that they backslid when they went home or decreased their sessions. And really, all that is that you made all these internal gains, but your environment stayed the same. So, of course, it's going to kind of pull you back to how things were. So, the feng shui is typically what I do typically what I do last with people, although that's not true for everyone. Sometimes we start with it. And that way we work with the environment so that you've made these internal gains. And then we work with your environment so it can support you and what you're actually trying to actualize for yourself and in your life. And then your environment helps continue supporting that forward.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of, and not to invalidate what you said, Tom Brady. Have you ever read anything on his training regimen?
No, tell me.
So this dude sets up like his house like with a certain type of temperature, because that temperature is going to allow for the cells to like heal and move a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there is like what do they call it, like sports science and sports
Yeah.
rehabilitation, right? So he sets up his entire environment suited for optimizing his ability to play on the field, and that seems like there's a science to it if you really want to go into it, right? But he sets up his entire household to that, and I also think too, humans, like we do it, like for example, gesturing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we feel dysregulated or we feel like we're threatened, we'll do certain things like we'll put our arms or our hands over our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes if we stay in that, we'll feel a little bit safer. The body calms down. It doesn't go into complete fight or flight. Um, like I do it with, like I'm a clean freak.
Mm-hmm.
I get that from the Marine Corps field day. So I like an empty house, but I got kids, so there's like always toys everywhere. So I'm always having to clean. Like if you were to go into my office at work, it is bare. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
there. And I think part of it is, well, a large part of it is if it's bare, then it means that I have no mind and renunciation from like I don't know if you ever read any of the Bhagavad Gita, but
Mm-hmm.
detachment from these particulars that are going to cause you some type of emotional dysregulation or emotional impact. So that's how I like to set things up where, like my candles, if they're scented, if I'm doing some type of writing, I like to get apple cinnamon, and I put it in an area where if the air is going to flow through, it's going to hit me the right way. So I'm constantly in a flow state.
Mm-hmm.
So is that like feng shui, or is there like
Yeah, it plays in, it definitely plays into all of that. And then within that, it's all really individualized. So I've worked with people who came from really stark blank homes because they weren't allowed to touch anything. The parents didn't have like personality on the wall because they were like so private. But it imposed that on the kids too. So for people like that, it's really freeing in feng shui to help them bring in their joys and their passions and use them to help decorate their space so that they feel like inspired and uplifted and valued as a person. Whereas people who came from really cluttered environments, they want my help making like the cleanest, brightest blank slate place because that is a place that's going to make them feel like they can breathe for the first time ever. So, so yes and no. Yes, but also there's a lot of individual conditioning and psychology and components to it.
that's cool?
Um, yeah,
That's
but with the
I was gonna
yeah,
say that's difficult for me to like commit to art pieces on the walls of my house. I have some, but like I specifically like spend a lot of time choosing them because I don't want them. Like when I look at art on the wall, it puts me in a certain mood, and
right.
sometimes I don't want to be in that mood. You know, like I'm in an outbuilding where I have like my home gym stuff and everything, and there's like pretty gnarly art pieces on the wall in here because this is like my room to be in a specific mood, but like in my bedroom, there's nothing on the walls. It's just it's like a robin's egg blue paint color
Mm-hmm.
and like that's it. But in my living room I have some abstract stuff, but like it's hard for me to commit because when I every time you look at a piece of art, like that takes you into a certain like headspace for me anyways. But so I'm one of those people that are like, don't, I don't want to be like, I want my mind to be in here, not like in that piece of art all the time. So
Yeah, and it's good that you have that awareness. A lot of people don't realize how subconsciously the art and the things they're seeing affect them. A lot of people don't begin with that awareness. So that's really good awareness. And then once people have that awareness, sometimes they get stuck, like afraid to put something up.
Right.
But one thing that's nice about feng shui is that there's different areas around the floor plan that are good for activating different aspects of your life. So, like if we do a full feng shui report, it'll tell you where it's best for you to have pictures of your family and community, or where it's best for you to have like your diplomas on the wall, or that kind of thing. So it kind of helps organize for people.
I wanted to backtrack a little bit to your I don't know if maybe I misunderstood, but your initial session with like the group of like SF guys. I'm just curious how that went and how that was set up. Like, did they approach you to do this, or was somebody like, "Hey, I think you need to work with these guys," and like, what did you do? Because I think I understand, the level of ego that goes with operators and, people that are in high risk situations. And like, it's hard for me to imagine them to be like, "Hey, let's, let's all go to this, do these sessions," because it just, to me, being at that point is already like, you're already beginning the process of trying to write your path, right? Like you can't, I don't envision somebody that's just in shambles like want to be like, "Hey, let me go try to do this." Like, you have to already acknowledge that you're not in this place you want to be, and you need to do things to help get you there.
Yeah, such a good question. Glad you backtracked. Um, all right, so I can answer that in a few different ways. So first way, pretty much everyone I worked with at those settings did not want to come to my sessions for the first time. So the doctors, so let's say their main provider, recognized a certain block with them and would put them on my schedule. So a lot of times sometimes they'd show up and be like, "Who is this Miss Jones?" They'd show up at my room. I've had plenty of people like walk it, like open the door, be like, "What the fuck is this?" And then I've even had some people turn around and leave. But everyone, once they came to my first session, I'd win them over in one session.
Yeah.
There were a couple people who would not come back after the first session, but there's only like 2 situations that I can think of, and both of them came back to me months later and said, "It wasn't you, it was me. I knew it was going to open things up and I just wasn't ready yet."
Mm-hmm.
And I had some people leave pissed during the first session, and come back and work with me and just be like, "Can we work one-on-one? I was afraid I was going to cry." And so, you can't take things at face value. But most people would come, not know why they were there, say they didn't know why they were there, say just like pointedly, "How the hell is this going to help me?" But in one session, they'd get won over. So the level 1 groups were really about providing art tasks that would feel like problem solving. So it's not like, it didn't start with a blank white paper and like put your brain on the paper. It did not start that way. So it starts with enough of a task and direction that they know where they're going, enough ability to problem solve that they don't have to feel like, "Well, what am I going to do if I'm not an artist?" And the prompts were, carefully crafted so that whatever needed to bubble up to the surface could come up. And then what's really special about that is it cuts out the filter, it cuts out the defenses, it cuts out the back and forth, it cuts out the feeling like the provider told them what's wrong with them or that kind of feeling, because they're the one who put whatever needed to come out on the table. So they kind of quickly, even if they feel surprised, they own it. They own it quickly because they're the one that put it there. So they'd get won over pretty quickly by feeling like it quickly got to the root of things that they haven't been able to express before. But other reasons that people would be sent to me were if they were heavily in treatment, but they were going to the therapies that are more like quote unquote acceptable. Like there's not that much stigma if you tell someone you're going to physical therapy. There's not that much stigma if you tell someone you're going to occupational therapy or speech therapy. If people know you have like a TBI or something, that's very common. But they'd be in those sessions, and they would just start opening up, and the PT would be like, hey, if you're gonna, like, I can't actually talk to you about this. If you really want to explore this, you should get on Jackie's schedule. Or like with a speech therapist, a lot of times, so people who have experienced trauma, when you're experiencing trauma, the verbal areas of your brain become inhibited. So you literally don't have the words to express what happened, or you might, but you might not want to use them, or you might not be allowed to use them. And so had a lot of people who were at the point where they were saying, something's up with me, I need help with this, but they were going to the therapies that have, I guess, are less weird or less stigmatized. They'd wind up in speech, they'd wind up in talk therapy, but they'd hit walls, and either, they would appear non-compliant when really they just no longer had the verbal ability to express what was going on. Or they had the words, but you can intellectually say anything. And if you're not really in the emotion about it, a shift isn't going to happen.
Right.
Right. So a lot of those other therapies, when people knew they wanted to get better, but were hitting walls, would say, okay, well, now it's time that you give that thing down the hall a try that you've been avoiding. And, a lot of, everyone says they wish they came sooner. So.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that. I just think a lot of people in the community walk around with walls up, and it's like nobody wants to start chipping away at it. But and that's okay. Nobody, you don't have to, I guess, if you don't want to. But if you want to and you don't, then that's, on you. But
so we start in those settings, we started in groups because of that. So, and it wasn't directed, like, you don't show up on day one. It's not like, show me your trauma. It's not, show me your grief, but it's these open-ended prompts that let whatever needs to bubble up to the surface come up. And then in that group setting, you're already seeing like, oh, okay, that guy has some guilt about something. I don't know what it is, but I have guilt. He has guilt. Okay. Shame would come up, grief would come up, kind of all the topics would get alluded to. And so that then people start to feel a little bit less alone in just those like general emotions. And then by level 2 groups, they're more comfortable with each other. They get deeper into some of the details about things that came up, and then they're feeling less alone. And then one-on-one, then we really dive into the details that a particular person has that they don't need to be processing in a group setting. But that was a really natural way to do that. Now that I work with people one-on-one, I have a different way of getting there, but we still do.
Yeah, it's the brain's a crazy thing. I just recently had a close brother of mine call me, and Marine brother, and he was very near some pretty high level blasts, and like his memory's gone completely. And he called to ask me some questions about like recalling, what happened. And I could tell he was like kind of like he was like shame, like he was sad that he had to like ask me, and if it was okay if he asked me this stuff, and I'm just like, dude, like, I love you, dude. Like, thank you. I was like, TBIs are a crazy thing. And he's not the type that would just like put it away in a closet or in a box somewhere because he didn't want to address it. Like he is mentally, I don't want to say, he's just somebody that is okay with processing stuff. He just couldn't recall it. And I'm like, dude, you you've had probably some pretty serious, waves get pushed through your brain. Like, it's okay that you don't remember. Ask me anytime, and it was a good conversation. It wasn't like a sob story or going down that path or anything, but like, I'm just like, damn, like, you probably your memory probably is really affected by this. And anyway, we got there. I brought some memories back for him just by telling him stuff, that and he like ended up remembering certain things, and we joked about stuff. But yeah, I was just like, damn, like, you really are affected, like, physically. Your brain is. So, and unfortunately there's probably too many people out there that have that, and they are just sitting in their house by themselves somewhere, like, not knowing what's wrong with them.
And yeah, it's true that especially with TBI, you can have some things missing, and it's why the neuroplasticity is important. And it's also why it's important to have these other ways to get at not only what happened, but how it's affecting you now. Right. So maybe with someone who can't remember the particular details, their body's still keeping track. Right. So the art activates the same areas of the brain that were active when having a trauma experience or anything that's really emotionally heightened. So people wind up like, it will come out in their drawings, the things that they literally nowhere in their head could remember, but the details that are like the keys do come up from the unconscious or subconscious in the art. And then even when we're not getting at the details, this is why I really love the yoga and the yoga nidra and things that I'm incorporating into the work now. And the Reiki is because it bypasses the need for details, and it brings to the surface the reason why it's still having an effect now. So then you can really just deal with that. Like, you don't necessarily have to go through all the details to figure out what the core belief is or what the core wound is to meet and address now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like you have been in a. Did you ever find out why he warned you against working with men? Is it because of everything I'm saying?
Yeah. He was just like, they're not going to take it seriously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like that'd be challenging for you, but you seem to have worked through that.
Yeah.
The modalities are powerful. Oh yeah. Can I respond to that really quick? Or do you want to?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's funny how, like right now it's slower for me to get clients because I don't have doctors putting people on my schedule. But the clients were like my greatest referral source anyway, because like, if they knew they had a buddy who was also supposed to be in art therapy but hasn't signed up yet, they knew exactly what to say to get them in there. Or by the time I was in Florida for yoga, they would tell their buddy like just go to yoga. She's going to make your butt sore in places you don't even know exist. Like, that's how they would like tell them to just go. And then once they're there, they're like, I didn't know I could feel peace or calm anymore. this is the place that I didn't know I could clear my mind and just have a silent mind for an hour, you know, and I didn't know I could feel happy or joy again. So they get the deeper benefits when they're there. Even if that's not the, yeah, I'm not going to walk up to someone I haven't met in the hallway yet and be like, hey, your butt's going to get sore in a place you haven't felt before. That's more like
Yeah.
a,
Yeah. I feel too that like your framework probably helps with a lot of guys that have clearances that can't talk about a lot of those operations. I know that that was a really big issue a few years back where a lot of these guys with anything above, an S, looking at those TS SCIs, a lot of them were dealing with just not being able to have an outlet, and they couldn't even go to traditional therapy or even going to the VA. They couldn't really talk about those things. And I know, like my mentor Mark, um, yeah, special operations background. He was actually the one that kind of introduced me into all these different approaches to mental health. It was me later in years that did not apply those lessons learned, and then eventually, whenever I hit rock bottom in 2019, it all came back. So I was very, very glad about that. But he also talked about that. It's just stuff that they couldn't talk about, they can't talk about. And that's why that network specifically is so tight, is because they can have some mention of it, or at least someone else knows, at least the presence of them understanding the situation, and then just being able to say, hey, I'm good, but I'm not good. And this is why. And then you have the outlet, right? Which is the art therapy or the farming or whatever. So I feel that that's pretty cool. Um, I was going to say too. I don't know if do you know Sean Ryan?
mm-hmm.
The he did a podcast with a guy named DJ Shipley, and
Okay.
and I think it's like 5 hours, 6 hours.
Very long.
It's so good though. But he gives a lot of credit to Nyko and the art therapy program.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And yeah, well, he started. So there's a whole segment that he talks about Nyko and what art therapy did, and he actually started a business. But he only specifically hires Gold Star family members, and
Uh-huh.
I think they do skateboards. They paint
Yeah, he's
them.
called a DJ. They do like high level training for law enforcement and government. He's a former SEAL, but him and his SEAL buddies have that company. But then he has like a skateboard company called Tribe Skates, where
Yeah,
I don't know the exact term of the process, but they like put a solution on a blank skateboard deck. And
Okay.
he's a skateboarder too, I think in his childhood he was anyway, but they take like electric leads, like current, and run it through this solution on the wood, so it creates like a like a branching effect, and
Okay.
it actually burns into the wood.
Yeah.
And he actually electrocute himself terribly. Anyway, that was a great episode, as I'm like reciting his life for him, but he got hurt really bad. But he still has this company where he has guys, that help him and come do that, or they buy his skateboards. And anyway,
yeah. He
yeah,
gives
that's interesting to me too. And like dialing back to your, obviously like love for art. And I think that's like so important, because I remember in school, like my mom came and would teach art to like my second, third grade classes. I like barely remember like her being there, but I know I have like a painted ceramic bunny that she still has in
Mm-hmm.
her pantry. But like I remember like doing that. And I think, I mean, I have like a wood shop, and I love doing like woodworking projects and like stuff like that, metal projects and stuff. Like that's my release. That's where I get my own time. And I know everyone's different, and what works for some doesn't work for others, but it's like, if you don't, I think at an early age, if you don't try things that are like, you know, you might not be good at, or might be embarrassing, or, things like that, to figure out what you do like and what you're good at later in life, like not that you're stuck, but I think as an adult, it's a lot harder for somebody to go out and be like, you know what? I think I want to try like painting, or I want to try learning how to sew or quilt or like do stuff like that. Like I'm sitting right next to a sewing machine, a nice Singer sewing machine that I have because I like to sew things.
Mhm.
And it's like that's just I just know that part of myself and like I need that. But I think some people that haven't had the opportunity or the exposure to be able to do that, especially at a young age, those things do help you in life. They make you feel valuable, like having the ability to do things and create stuff that can not only help yourself but other people. And I just think that's critical. I don't know what like schools are doing anymore as far as like those creative arts type options. Like I remember we had home ec. Like that's where I initially learned to sew, making
Mhm.
pillows and stuff. And it's like, I don't know. I worry about that because I think that we talk about purpose a lot on here, and I know everybody does because it's like, oh, that you got to find your purpose. And it's like, but that's how you find it, is trying stuff, trying things that might not be masculine or, whatever, because you can get huge benefits from it. I think that is important, especially with bringing kids up. It's like giving them the avenues to like explore these types of things. Um,
They still have
but
some of
yeah,
Yeah.
those.
do you? Or I mean, is there?
Well, at least in the school district that I work in, they're actually beefing up CTE courses, which is career technical and engineering. They still have home ec. They call it foods, and they do have theater, band, and they do have art. But those are electives. They're not. Those are like if kids want to do it. It's not like a mandatory thing.
Right.
Yeah. And just art by itself is therapeutic. Like you're saying, that's your release, it's your alone time. And there's a lot of therapeutic benefits just from like the sense of creating. And
Hmm.
especially with this community, we hear often, it's nice to go from feeling like you're a destructive force to feeling like you're creative or constructive or creating something, building something. Um, Therapeutically, it's also really in creating anything product oriented, it builds your self-efficacy, it builds your self-confidence, it's grounding, it's relaxing, it decreases cortisol, so it lowers stress and anxiety. And then in in art ed, when we take a more product oriented approach, that's where you get those types of benefits. And then art therapy is kind of the reverse, where we take more of a process oriented approach. So typically, at least near the beginning, um, it's more intuitively driven. So it's not really about the product. The product winds up coming and then we can explore the meaning from it. But it's that process of learning to create intuitively without necessarily knowing where you're going, where your soul can really speak to you. So people who feel lost, if it feels, daunting to try everything you can get your hands on, if you learn these, so like in an art therapy session, we can guide it so that your soul is literally speaking to you, like the answers are within you, right? And then the yoga nidra is that way too. So you get guided down into a theta state, so your mind isn't controlling it. You're really allowing what needs to come up from your soul level to be met and seen, but the answers are there. It's just learning, or not even necessarily learning, just welcoming yourself into an environment that's going to help it just like expand you in the way that your own inner wisdom can come up.
Yeah, that's something like I've gone down that rabbit hole. It's like how many like amazing musicians are out there that never had the opportunity
Right.
to I've thought about that, or like artists or like whatever. If you don't like try, you'll never know. And I mean, that might not be a bad thing, but you might be missing out on a whole lot. And I guess I don't know, that turns into a different thing if you think everything's supposed to happen, you know, the way it does.
Right.
But yeah.
Aristotle, baby. Aristotle, everything happens at the right moment for the right time for the right reasons. Yeah, but that does get dangerous for sure.
Yeah.
Jackie, I do have a question. Maybe you don't have answer to it. What are your thoughts on like the future of mental health, or at least I don't know if you intend to work with like the veteran demographic, or if you're just expanding your demographics. What are your thoughts about how we should proceed into the future with? I mean, right now, in between like the CDC and the National Institute of Mental Health, we're in between what 57 to 74 million people with some type of AMI, SMI. We have an entire population that's already predisposed. 80% of the American population has some type of traumatic um, event that has happened in their life. Um, yeah, just what are your thoughts on? And I know that's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. I've thoughts. I have thoughts and answers. I connected. So like the example you said before, giving money to provide mental services or mental health services to a particular community, making sure that's not just a look, we're doing something about it. Like a lot of times in those situations, it's like, look, we gave them 6 visits to a therapist. Like, why isn't your anger dealt with yet? Like, why are you still reactive and not taking into account, I mean, everything preliminary that you said, like getting through the stigma, teaching people that they even have choice when they're choosing a therapist they resonate with or anything like that. So there's all the preliminary hurdles, but then there's also giving providers reins to work with people in a way that actually works with a human's biology and chemistry. Like it takes time. If you have someone who was born from a mom who was in trauma, they're already going to be born with a smaller hippocampus. They're already going to be predisposed to being more reactive. So it's going to take more than 6 talk sessions to change. You know, there's neuroplasticity, so there's hope. Like everyone can grow into a more resilient brain. Everyone can work through grief. Everyone can work through trauma, but it takes time. It takes approaches that help expand your brain. And but beyond all the like neurological mental health stuff, it's all it's, you know, big tech, big pharma, everyone taking responsibility. So it's not just addressing emotions in the brain if you're not giving people fresh produce, because the gut brain axis is huge. Like you can't expect someone to be calm and grounded when their very fuel is not what the earth is made out of, right? And then people, I mean, this is why there's things called forest bathing and things like that. It's so incredibly grounding to walk outside in real nature with your bare feet, not just because it's like a hippie thing and the grass is soft, but because there's negative ions in the earth that balance us. We're batteries, get positive from the sun, negative from the earth. And if we never do that, then we never get grounded, like in a chemical level. So when we have people living far away from trees and grass and fresh air and everything that the earth can naturally provide for us, of course, we're going to get more and more disconnected from our nature. So I think the future of mental health, honestly, it's what I'm doing. Like when I work with people, I'm working with them on a physical level. What are you eating? It plays into your anxiety. It plays into your your skin. It plays into feeling depressed. It matters um, to self-expression, because if you're never expressing how you really feel about things, it all gets suppressed and internalized, and may turn into angry outbursts for someone. It may turn into debilitating anxiety for someone else, but it always manifests in some way. It's the yoga and meditation to help people really get present, because if you're always living in the past or always living in the future, you're not present, you're not living in the here and now. You can't really make the best choices for your future if they don't align with what's best for you right now. So it's like constantly realigning, but then also being connected to the space as well, because if you're in optimal functioning but not aligned with the environment, then it doesn't really work. So I think the future is really realizing that everything's connected, and 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 acting like it.
That was awesome. Thank you. Have you ever read any a guy, he was a Jesuit priest in World War One. His name was Pierre the Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
Okay.
He wrote a series of books, but um back then he talked about a thing called the noosphere. Have you ever heard of that word? The noosphere?
No, the
It's
noosphere. Okay.
Yeah, Noosphere.
I've seen that. I can't tell you what it is.
Okay, if you get a chance, I'll send you a quote,
Okay.
or and it has like the book that you can read. But the newest fear is, it's like I said, I've been taking these classes with these folks that just understand technology on a whole other level, and they've been there since the beginning. But there's this idea that there's this um, an actual like a natural network, and then there's this kind of like artificial network that we call the internet. And the newest sphere is this kind of like human thought evolution that encircles all of the globe. And throughout the antiquities, people have called it different names, like the Akashic records, so forth and so forth. Some of the R&D stuff I've been looking into is how to actually utilize a function that we might call psi, or precognition, and a lot of it taps into some of the holistic frameworks that we've been talking about. And the military has done some stuff with it. Just they don't. It's gone through different names and evolutions. Um, but these folks that are very affluent, very published, get all the good contracts in order to develop stuff, all have in mind that there is a way to connect to that, and in doing so, it requires what essentially you just said. Um, when all this is over, when we're done, I'll send you 2 videos so you know what I'm talking about. Um, and that is the hope, is that at some point, so there's like a genetic component where somehow people with certain types of abilities are finding each other across the globe. Some people like at Stanford who are doing this work, that are studying brain regions like the cognitive entertainment, they're saying that it's a variable, in the sense that how is it that two people from different entire histories, biohistory, are finding one another with a capability and then having children? Like there's an anomaly there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's something to it. What it is, I don't know. So there's like like a code source for all of this, like a biosignature that's leading us. And I think a lot of it plays into um, the whole mental health paradigm, where it's like it's completely out of sync. And in order to get that
Mm-hmm.
into sync, we have to find that again. But finding it is difficult, especially when you have things that are compounding faster, and histories that are being undermined and kind of thrown to the backside. Uh, but I do hope that at some point mainstream science begins to look at that one more time. And it seems to be going that way with everything that's being disclosed, like at the Pentagon and the DoD. And like, for example, I have a colleague, she's a space psychologist. Um, she's been working on a few projects, specifically looking into the language of insects and animals. So her focus is how to optimize and reduce all the bad things that could go wrong with somebody traveling into deep space. And so they're attempting to find different modes of communication because by the time, like say you're like at Jupiter, by the time you receive someone's distress signal or some biometric, so many days and hours have passed by. So she's developing some mechanisms to actually try to create what she calls earth sounds or earth designs, something along those bases. But she's already published several books for like children, for like babies. So when my newest born was got here, they sent a book, and it's a book that's just black and white contrast. It has different shapes, but whenever my son picks it up or whenever I show him, he's like mesmerized by it. And something that I've been tampering with too is acoustics, but trying to specifically get audio from like nature. The hard part is all the background noise with the freaking. Well, I have a gun range
Yeah.
not too far from here, so like in the evening times, you're just hearing, bah, bah, bah. And we get a lot of choppers. But in the morning, so part of the process that I do, because I wake up super early, so by the time I get back from the gym, the sun's already rising. So I automatically begin to look into the sky, not at the sun, so I can regulate my cortisol levels. And my tinnitus has gotten worse over the years, so it becomes a lot more difficult for me to actually pay attention to like nature and birds. So I slap on all the rainstorm and the different bird noises in order to actually keep that in my head. Like, so whenever I do some type of resourcing where I'm going to a person or a place or a thing, I can actually tap into that and begin to immerse myself into that particular thing that has the psychophysiological effect. But what the heck was my point? I was gonna vet brain. Nonetheless, those are some of the modalities that I'm trying to work with so that I could actually put that out there, where you actually look at. This is one of the questions that I wanted to ask is like, at what point does like your genetic history come into play, right? So there are certain foods, maybe like for example, the VA wanted me to do a thing called pharmacogenomics, where they test my blood to see what drugs I can best metabolize. I do think that on some level, understanding our genetic history plays a huge role in how we actually how our gene sequence so that we can optimize for a better longevity. And so I'm curious to know, like I'm curious, like what would the envi or the bioacoustics of a particular geolocation do for somebody who is from that but lives like in New York City, right? What type of impact would that have on some level in order for that whole executive decision making process, that whole brain functioning process to better balance itself out or actually harmonize. And so anyway, nonetheless, those are the things that the people that I'm working with look into and are doing at a government level and even at their own like personal level because they still have their own clinics and they still have their own private practices. But I do think that's like the way forward is not so much as a regression, but more so a we just go back. We just we're finding again what used to work, despite technological advancements. You know what? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Are they looking at measuring the interpersonal communication through like vibration and intuition?
Yeah, they are. How they're doing it though, they can't disclose. And that was
Okay.
one of the back in 2020 when I started. So I have a program that I've been trying to conceptualize and bring to the table where we actually take. So this is how I begin the program. Um, in the early 20th century, the Marine Corps began to revolutionize the way it conducted warfare, and so we created um, fire teams as a result of the transformation of automatic weapon systems. And as a result of that, you've had this like periodic generation of individuals who have served, and then all of a sudden their kids go serve, and then the
Mm.
pattern repeats itself. So there's a genetic component to it, but it seems, and it's pretty obvious when you look at it this way, but there's obviously a connection between a group of agents forming a collective in order to conduct certain types of daily activities, whether it's for living or whether it's for, whatever. So there's a science behind that. How much of the science or how much of that's actually been broken down and analyzed is another thing. So what I was looking at is there are programs in existence that use certain types of domains and understanding where individuals are making intuitive decisions, or they're having premonitions or presentiments. And the ONR, the Office of Naval Research, was actually doing a lot of this research around 2011, and they came up with a thing called sense making and perspective taking. And what they published wasn't really anything novel. Um, it was it seemed to me that they were using a little bit of narrative, meaning how do you transport and immerse an individual to basically take on the perspectives of a particular population so that they could best make decisions about a potential outcome, whether it be potential individuals planning an ID or conducting an ambush. And that does work, but it doesn't really take into perspective all the little things, all the meticulous things that go into it, like diet, sunlight, the science of the team, what's actually happening within the body. And that's where it got kind of stuck, was that the only people that were actually implementing the programs were in the special operations community, and they have a method, but they don't really use wearable biometrics, partly because they were being tracked. And we now know that they were being tracked because all that data is basically online. Um, so basically, I don't know if you know this, but people who had their little wearable biometric watches, when they would run around base, they were basically creating a map of the base. And so
Uh-huh.
that got, that basically that was a no-go. Okay.
Yeah.
But now that we're moving into this other age of weapons and whatnot, designer technologies are able to actually pinpoint biometrics or biosignatures.
Right.
And if you were to get a group of operators that had their information leaked, then you can design the neural weapon or the UAV in order to find that, and that's very dangerous. But my point was is that we're not really in real time. We're not looking at what's happening inside the body when people are making or having these presentiments or premonitions. Not only
Right.
that, we're not looking at all the um, what they might call oh my goodness, the dowsing, right? So there's a lot of topographical dowsing that's being done. So for example, someone looking at a satellite map and saying, okay, this is where they're going to be tomorrow, or this is where I feel something's going to happen. Then they go out there and they already have a preset plan to mitigate that impact. And sure enough, they find something there, or they find a cache, or they find the high value target, right? We're not taking that data and putting it into a baseline to try to find what's actually going on. And that's what I was trying to do. And that's how I forecast the future mental health, is through these things called self-sustaining teams, where you have a continuous loop of information optimizing But the thing is highly individualized protocol. So for example, I think that everyone would benefit from art therapy, right? But what if your psychogenetic template isn't suited for that? What if it requires something else? So we shift it,
Mhm.
right? Right. And not saying that, not to invalidate what you're doing, but maybe the art therapy would be a secondary or tertiary component of keeping that optimization going. And so what we're trying to do is really look at what is allowing this kind of like space and time information to get tracked back retrocausally, where an individual is making decisions off of that. And that's a hard thing to do because that's like magic. And
Yeah.
yeah, so maybe one day in 10 years, we might have that capability. I don't know. But I do think what I do know is that there's a lot to be said with a lot of the frameworks that you're working in, a lot of the frameworks that a lot of these prestigious institutions are doing. And it's baffling to me that even in the mainstream, regardless of how these institutions are doing this work, um, it's not being put out there, but it's also not being, made prominent like this is a thing that's actually being done right now. Rather, you have, I'm going to go to the VA, they want to put me on meds, rather than saying, hey, let's try this first.
Yeah. Um, few things I want to say in response to that. So the first, it's a big reason why I incorporate my whole toolbox now, because you're right. There's some people I work with, we never even do art therapy, because based on what their goals are and what their current block is, we might dive straight into Reiki, or we might dive straight into meditation. So I kind of, like, within each modality, there's a spectrum. Like, let's just, so in art therapy, there's something called the expressive therapies continuum. And it's basically, if you were to take every art supply and lay them out, so they created a spectrum of a material that's going to get a person to regress the most, to a material that's going to help a person get in their most control. And then based on like how they're presenting and what their issue is and what they need to work through, it that informs what material we choose to offer them in the session. And then, so that's like within art therapy, but then within each modality I offer, there's something like that. Even with yoga, something that's very, your, like a power class is going to be way different than a 40-minute theta state meditation where you're totally, laying there passive in a lucid dreaming state. And then I have all the modalities like in a spectrum, essentially. So based on how someone's presenting and what their block is, I know which modality to bring to the table when, and also how to help them play off of each other. And then another thing that came up in my mind while you were talking, not only do more people need to talk about these things, but be open to experiencing them. And then the fact that so many things are virtual now, it makes it so much harder to deny the power of like the magic and energy and vibration and this sort of intuitive work. Like, I initially learned Reiki. I initially was a client, and then I learned it and one-on-one. And there's a certain amount of power you feel when someone is shifting energy in you. And then your belief in it deepens so much when you experience super powerful shifts online. The person's in a different state, the person's in a different country, and they're able to Reiki through time and space through the screen. So I like in person, my practice, I probably see about a third of my clients in person and 2/3 of my clients virtually, but we'll do it all. Can do energy work online, can do for feng shui, can do all the energetic space clearings of the home online. People feel the shifts. They tell me, even people that don't know they did it feel the shifts. Like kids will go over to the house and be like, what feels different? Our house feels great. Like people feel it even when they didn't know that their dad was working with a feng shui person.
Wow.
People feel it and comment on it. And learning theta healing online, like I did my training for that online, and we would do the breakout rooms. Like she would partner people up in different breakout rooms, and so it's just you one-on-one with someone, and you're reading into each other's energies and saying like what you see coming up for them. And it's the most random stuff, right? But that is completely meaningful to that person you're talking to. And that you can see you as you like switch through the different one-on-one breakout rooms, everyone you're paired with can see the same thing. So it's like this energetic power that's way bigger than us. And then another thought that came to mind when you were talking, one of the blocks may be like the permission aspect. So I do have clients who are like, you know, can't you do Reiki on my ex-girlfriend and just like make her shift her feelings? Like, I can't. I can do Reiki on you because you're giving me permission to. I cannot do that. I can't do it behind her back. She's not giving me permission.
That's
Right.
voodoo. That's voodoo dolls,
Right.
right?
And that's
Brujeria.
so and then even in a Reiki session, there's steps that you do to prepare the energy of the space and the person and your own, and then to be able to channel. And if you forget the step where you physically ask the person, do I have permission to enter your energy field? It is the weirdest. It's like you hit an invisible wall. It just won't let you go through. And then you remember to ask. And then it's like, then it's like clear channel, floodgates. So, I mean, and that's just something that you can feel like on a one-on-one level, working in this intuitive way and like silent interpersonal energetic communication that I don't know how people study, but I definitely know the feeling of when there's a block because someone hasn't given permission versus when they've given permission and it's like free flowing.
That reminds me of, so I grew up in a very religious setting, and they didn't allow us to like watch cartoons or anything like that. Now that I've studied like a science of memetics, which I was gonna track back a little bit about the art therapy stuff with that. Anyway, the point that I was trying to make is it's like vampires, right? You don't allow someone to come in near your house, because if you do, and it's the same thing with like the stuff. Like when I go to work, I don't bring my problems to work. Like I actually have a physical ritual that I do before I get to work, and it's a lot of breath work, um, just so I don't bring that type of energy. Because people are like, "What's wrong with you?" Like, and meanwhile, there's an anniversary date, or it's just the summertime, which amps me up all the time, and I'm trying to work through that, and they feel that. Um, yeah. I was gonna make a brief mention. If you ever get the chance, you should look up a study that was done by 3M. I don't know if you ever heard of that company.
Yeah, I'm
And
gonna write it down.
3M is it's a defense contractor, or they produce stuff. They ended up doing a they ended up doing um a little mini operation on their worker base, So they basically set up a bunch of memes, whether it was posters, whether it was visuals, something like that, to increase productivity. And there was a massive spike in productivity because of the information that was being processed subconsciously
Mm.
started boosting them up. Um, yeah, that's the more tech side of things as well. With like art therapy and how well, I want to say art therapy, but if you really wanted to manipulate atmospherics,
Hmm.
memes is or a mimetic campaign would do that. I find mimetics, semiotics, and signs and symbols to be very fascinating because it moves entire populations, even the more antiquated ones. Um, I have a question, but I don't know if you may be able to answer it or not. And have you done any work with psychedelics?
So the min answer is kind of no, kind of minimal, kind of. I've had clients come to me to kind of undo the work of psychedelics because there have been some people who weren't doing them under the guidance and of a practitioner, and they were self-using to self-medicate something, but the psychedelics kind of too quickly opened them up to some
Oh,
huge insight that they then, when they came out of it and were like back on earth, that schism was too big. And it actually like freaked them out a lot and made them really hesitant to do anything grounding or meditative or anything that was remotely near that. So I've
fun.
actually worked with people through these holistic ways that's like gets you to the same place, but way more at your pace. Like yourself is metering the depth of each time instead of getting kind of like catapulted into an awakening and then like sprung back.
Yeah,
So yeah,
Mhm.
that's how I'd answer that. Kind of like the after effects.
the ontological
Yeah.
shock.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a Navy SEAL that I got introduced to. He just wrote a book. I haven't ordered it yet or read it. Um, but he terms he uses the term psychedelics. You know, people think that he's actually talking about like psychedelics, but he's basically created a way where people can have a psychedelic experience without the psychedelics,
Yeah.
and it's more the holistic approach. Yeah, I've dabbled with them. They do some good, especially when it comes to like the neurogenesis, the neuroplasticity side of things. They do have an impact for sure. Um, yeah, I just wanted to ask that.
Yeah. I'd say, I've had a lot of discussions with friends, and they describe the benefits, and then I have the exact same description of the benefits I get from the type of like meditation and art that I do on a regular basis. And what I've tried in the past, I did not feel anything from, whereas people around me had these experiences that they described as what I usually get out of my meditation and art. So I think that I would be more in the aligned with the author you were just quoting, where I feel like the things that I do as part of my practice are that anyway. And it's funny because when people look at my art that I'll do on my free time, one of the most common questions is, were you on psychedelics when you did this?
Oh
And the
wow.
answer is no, I just was drawing intuitively from my soul, like had some classical music playing and drew like each mark, at the moment it came up out of me. So I think this all gets to this very similar same place. It's just, I would say some differences are, one is like maybe potentially faster and facilitated by external substances and people, and the other may appear slower, but what I would say to the slower is it's more about you're metering your own pace. There's like inner wisdom part inside of you that kind of meters the pace. It's the best way I can explain it.
No, I get you. I get you. In those videos that I'll send you, they talk about tapping into not so much as flow, but so one of my colleagues is about to publish a book. It's coming out. It's done already. It's coming out in November. It's called Encounters with Non-Human Intelligences and whatnot. And there's a lot of folks in academia and the scientific community that have done amazing things, created amazing biotechnologies, have revolutionized the way we do things in space, the way we do things in science. And there's this attribution to an external agent or an external force. And sometimes, like, have you ever felt that maybe what you're creating isn't from you, it's from somewhere else?
Yeah, it's definitely like from an expanded, connected
Gotcha.
place.
Yeah. The one of the examples they gave was Ramanujan, the mathematician. Are you familiar with that story?
Mm-mm.
So Ramanujan was, I think it was the 19th century. Grew up in India, poor, no education background whatsoever. One day he gets this book of math, and from it he's able to create mathematics that we're still trying to figure out today. Um, and he eventually gets discovered. He goes to Britain and whatnot, and but throughout his lifetime, he attributed his ability to understand math and gain these math functions as a result of oh my god, I can't remember the name of the goddess, but it was a goddess that was having this relationship with him and giving him the information. And there's a whole population of these individuals that are up there that are having these types of connections. And part of it is they all know that and that's what the course is called of those videos. It's the protocols. There's a highly individualized protocol for everyone in order to tap into that. And we go from everything from like the biology and the anatomy type stuff of what these people are doing in order to tap into that, and then how we could apply it to our lives. And like the class was built up of authors and artists and mathematicians and scientists, and it's just a wild thing that their attribution to these wonderful pieces of art or their work is an attribution to an external force or agent. The lady um, Dr. Plante, she calls it the formless.
Mm-hmm.
And she calls it the formless because the moment we begin to make attribution, we end up creating a schematic of, oh, this is it. And like, so for example, like Ramanujan attributing, his external force to the goddess. Her view is not to take away the fact that there is a religion or a potential goddess doing it. It's the fact that the moment we begin to do that, we begin to kind of like lose sight of it. We may become dogmatic. We may even limit that ability to access that part as a result of going down these lines, which may of orthodox or dogma. They may not even be a part of the process itself. Rather, to call it the formless because we kind of don't know what it is actually that is being tapped into, and that's kind of what Chardin was talking about with the noosphere, is that we're tapping into something that we don't know what it is, and it's giving us what we need. And I hope one day someone writes that book. I think I think Encounters might be a little bit of that history. It's a little bit out there, but I think it's like the right time now, since certain things are changing and being disclosed as we speak.
Mm-hmm. I like that because this stuff shows up in the work. So I like it because all of this shows up in the work I do. These are common topics in the work that I do, but it's funny because you have to, another part of the spectrum of knowing what modality to use with a person at any given time is someone may not be ready to talk about like energy yet.
Yeah.
Right. Or like I practice sound bowl healing, and a lot of, I was trained in Nepal for that and have a really powerful set, and people have really amazingly powerful sessions, and the vibrations of the bowls they just work magic. But it's hard initially to get someone from like not believing in energy work or anything to just saying, yeah, let's try a sound bowl session. So usually there's like a little bit of a, a sequence you go through as people are opening up. Oh, I do remember what I was going to say to what you were saying, kind of a more micro level of that. So I practice transcendental meditation personally every morning and in the afternoon too. But in that, you can kind of a more micro scale of what you were talking about is just problem solving. Like even if so Einstein has the quote that the same mind can't solve an issue, right? So as long as you're in the same mind, you're not going to be able to solve a problem. So you have to do something to open your mind just a little bit more so a new solution can come in. And that's what we get at every time in the Yoga Nidra that I practice. So it is really expansive, and there's so many stories when you get trained in TM of how many really important technological devices or like really influential books came to people when they were doing their TM, or just really in a place where their mind was like open and expanded enough that these other things could come in, be channeled in from wherever they attribute it to. But even in just daily life, like if my partner and I are having an argument, both of us know TM, we'll take 10 minutes to do our own TM. We'll come back and have a really good solution to our problem. So it doesn't have to just be huge works of art, can also just be the day-to-day. How do I get past this little block? How do I get past this little tiff? It all comes into play. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything in response, but
No, what I was thinking is all that's like data, like that's a data point, and that's what I hope, like where the mainstream, not, I don't even know if I should even call it the mainstream. I mean, at some point, these dots got to connect where we're beginning to look at everything rather than just a trained and limited scope of things, right? Like Ramanujan's case, where he was attributing his thing. And what is that, right? I don't know what it is. I call it God, and God is like a life force, and and I mean, there's some data to showcase, the impact that faith-based approaches do have some type of work. And that's something. Sorry, I get vet brain every once in a while.
Oh, it's okay.
That's what it's a joke.
Yeah.
We call it vet brain when you know.
That's okay.
I think everybody gets that though.
Yeah.
Vet brain, yeah.
Some people call it brain farts. That's what I've heard it called, a brain fart.
Jackie, do you know what that's about? But why we have these
like
blockages?
when you lose your train of thought.
Well, a few things. So I think sometimes, okay, they even talked about this with the Taylor Swift concerts. Like sometimes when you're so present, you don't remember. So I
Ah,
think part of what's going on here, I think we're all being very present with the conversation. I think that when you were speaking and I had an idea of what I wanted to say back, the reason I forgot it was because I kept really listening intently to what you were saying. So I kept being so present with you. Then it didn't come back to me until I started talking and the topic came back up again. But that wasn't because of like a, a, a structural issue in my brain. That was literally, I was being that present. I think
mm,
that that was going on with you too. But yeah, they were talking about the Taylor Swift effect because so many people were so excited to go to that concert and spend all the money on the concert. And then afterwards couldn't even tell back their like favorite part of the concert. It was like they had no memory of it because they
yeah.
were so present. But that's just what happens when you're in your bliss, your joy, your flow, when you're fully present, fully immersed. It actually makes it really hard to learn how to teach yoga and meditation because when you're learning it, you're in it. And when you're so present, it's really hard to recall step by step what you did. So it's
But
kind of
but
a
you
funny thing.
but you still learn it though, right? It's just you have to tap into it later on. I mean, is that what you're saying? Like you still
Yeah.
get the gifts, you just couldn't recall them, you know, right after or
Yeah, you get it. It's just more of a back and forth process. Like you learn intellectually what's going on, but then if you're getting guided through a meditation and you're intellectually following along, it doesn't work because you can't get out of your intellectual mind and drop down into your theta state if you're actively thinking. So you go through a period where you like you fight that, you're trying to follow along, and then you realize you got nothing out of the meditation. So then you let yourself drop in, but then you have no memory of what they were guiding you through. So it's kind of like it's it's going back and forth through like the intellectualizing and the embodying and just going back and forth until it clicks and you make sense and you know what you're doing. But it's an important process to go through.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a I guess there's some debates going on right now saying that muscle memory is not an actual thing. Like your muscles don't remember anything. It's something else. And little by little, I'm like trying to step away from that word consciousness because we can't really define what that is. And
Mm-hmm.
when I think of consciousness, I think of like panpsychist type things where somehow everything is like self-aware to a certain degree, at least. Um, but yeah, I find myself, I don't think, so I know like, oh, now I remember what I was going to say. With I think to the point that you were trying to make with how you have like the levels, like you don't start off with somebody into singing bowls, because I do singing bowls with all my students. And then like when I work with adults, we're teaching them the biological model, there's a process where we go through understanding what the resilient zone is, or our biosignature, our bioresilience threshold. Then we go into tracking, where we talk about how the central nervous system, the way we communicate with it is through sensation. That's why
Mm-hmm.
words don't work whenever someone's in fight or flight or freeze, right? Can't tell them to
Mm-hmm.
calm down. And then we go from tracking to resourcing, which is just imagining, teaching them basically cognitive mechanics, how person, places, or things and the details of those things give us the same effect if we were actually there with those things in
Mm-hmm.
the moment. And then we go into grounding, which they define as depending your relationship to the ground, your relationship to earth. If it doesn't feel safe, if it's not, foundational, then more than likely a lot of other things are not going to be foundational. So we do a series of what they would call practical and evidence-based approaches to what we might call holistic. What you go in more depth with it, but this is just to get it out to everyday
Mm-hmm.
folks that don't understand it. And I put on the Tibetan singing bowls from YouTube because I can't do it. I can't do the thing. I'll get too distracted or I'll start banging it. But I do that, and um it puts people to sleep real quick, which is not what I
Mhm.
want them to do. But more than likely, that's what the body wants them to do because they're not
Yeah.
getting sleep or they're just so stressed out. And I always like with all my students and all the faculty that I work with, everyone that I work with, I tell them take 10 minutes out of your day. If you're blocked or if you're not performing or you're not going or you need something is impacting you, go to your YouTube, put on your headphones, 10 minutes real quick, focus on that. And there's ways to do it. I guide them through. I have like a little paper that I guide them through with their breath work and whatnot. And man, it is impactful. And I don't take a lot of them, but I take at least like 2 or 3 grounding sessions a day when I'm at work. Just
Mhm.
some of those situations they can get to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, um, I'm sure you have a process, right, from dealing with polyvolatile information. I feel bad for my therapist sometimes because I'm not trying to like trauma dump, but there is a
Mhm.
lot that comes from that, and that kind of killed me earlier on. Whenever I got out, there's a lot of guys that were reaching out to me, and I didn't know how to regulate or even know what that stuff was. I just knew that if I physically moved and did things outside, that I felt a lot better.
Mhm.
But then all that information would come with me, and it like ruined the experience. So the things that were helping me could no longer help me because all of their stuff was with me. Um, so out of curiosity, what do you do in order to try to like maintain, not get burned out? Because that's got to be a lot.
Yeah. So it's a good question. Um, I like how when you become a therapist, there's naturally a ramp up. So before school, you're probably naturally empathetic and a good listener. Friends come to you a lot. You get used to like carrying that sort of weight. And then in school, um, with those internships, throughout the course of being at school, we would practice doing therapy on each other in class. We would have internship 2 to 3 days a week. So, like part time, learning to carry that weight. And at the same time, learning what things are good resources or outlets. Um, and then when you move on and you're working professionally, now you're, at your 5 days a week. And that also is like a new jump of other people's weight that you're
Mhm.
carrying. Um, an interesting component is even with all of that, like you're hearing, you're listening, you're empathizing. But you need to have you develop a certain like screen because it's not helpful to people if you're absorbing everything.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like if someone's talking to you and you're just like crying incessantly, like that's not helpful, right? So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
like, you learn how to carry the weight. You also learn how to have like a screen of empathy that's not necessarily absorbing. But things do get through, especially I think it's the military is a unique population to work with, especially when you work in a setting where you work with people from all branches with different jobs. So, like if my schedule is every hour on the hour, another service member, one person is talking to me about cleaning up the Pentagon after 9/11. The next person is talking to me about all of the horrible sexual assaults that are happening on a certain base because they're more in a cop role there or a forensic role there. And then the next person is talking to me about what happened when they were deployed. It's like all of a sudden, it's not just, there's some populations where back to back to back, you know, every person's different, but they might be talking about similar situations. I think the military is unique in that every hour your mind can be expanding to like, oh, this is going on in the world. This is going on in the world. This is going on in the world. And so what worked for me, number one was what I do. So I would naturally go to art, would naturally externalize. I mean, even abstractly, what I got very quick. So like if there was a particular story that was becoming in my dreams, like that would quickly get externalized on paper, like through my own personal art therapy in some way, some abstract way. I'm not breaching anyone's confidentiality or anything, but it's just some external abstraction, get it outside of me. Once I externalize it through art media, I don't have a dream about it anymore. So it's really like learning, okay, this is an indicator that I've absorbed something that's not mine. Now I'm going to get it out through art. Or the reason yoga came in as an important thing is because you can understand psychologically what's impacting you. You can externalize it, but it may still have resonance in your body. So yoga is a really helpful place to, like, different emotions get stored in different parts of our body. And if you're not opening and stretching and releasing all those different places, they just get trapped. So yoga is really good at helping release any of those trapped emotions. And then over time, I think especially after I was in a car accident and had my own TBI, I will say the TBI did affect my filter, that filter that I described developing. So when I was rehabbing from my own concussion, my boss warned me not to jump into doing deep trauma work with my clients too quickly. And, I listened for a bit, but I did start too soon because like, that's what I did. I didn't want to waste people's time when they showed up. So, but I do remember the first day that I went hardcore, like doing real trauma processing with everyone, I cried for like 6 hours straight that night, like uncontrollably. It was so weird how that TBI like broke that protective screen that I had created. It did come back over time. That was, that kind of came back with, it took me like 3 months to get back on a bike. I could feel over time, like, okay, today I can handle 10% more. Today I can handle 10% more. And like, then I was back to 100, but so it's fine. But it was an interesting experience to feel that like ability that I wouldn't even know where in my body to attribute it to, just being like gone and disrupted and then having to build it back. But anyway, after that got me into the energy work, because even after I personally could intellectually understand the effect of something, whether it was in my personal life or something someone had told me in session, then even after I could release it from my body through yoga, you still get this sense sometimes when you're creating space for other people all day. Sometimes you get to a place where like you feel an emotion and you don't know if it's yours or if it's someone else's anymore. So that's where the energy healing was really powerful. It really helped me sort through like, no, this is your sadness, work through this. Or like, this is their sadness, let's release it. And so the energy work, I would say, was really key in dealing with like vicarious trauma, honestly. And my go-to is nature. I just love exploring, especially when with really heavy caseloads of trauma. It just is important that like weekends are spent doing a new hike, or like I guess I was finding that like intentionally my self-care, it's not like watching TV. It's very much like finding a new corner of beauty in the earth that can offset maybe like the subject matter of the day, because both are happening. But if you're just talking about all the horrible things going on all day, that it does kind of bias you. So yeah, I think it's really important to go out and find the beauty that exists in the world, and connect with people and nature, and look at the wisdom of nature, and be humbled by it and everything like that.
Yeah, get away from that 24-hour news cycle of just constant negativity and, terrible stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And not only that, I don't know, my spouse, my wife, she watches reality TV, and I can't. I can't even watch like dramas because I'm like I'm like feeling it. I get an anxiety
Yeah.
just watching that crap, and I'm like, oh my god. But it sucks you in, and that's the power of of narrative, is that it puts you literally transports you into those stories, and it becomes your own. Um, I have a whole list of PDFs that I have to go through and read. My summer reading list is like super long, and not even halfway through. But there was a recent study that came out talking about how people's brain waves can now sync with one another.
Yeah.
But that's been like back in the 60s and 70s they had that figured out. And
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, it's like back and forth, but I don't like looking people in the eyes anymore. When I'm face to face with them. It's like an invitation. I try not to be rude, and I try to be respectful. But whenever you ask them, hey, how you doing? Or they ask you, hey, how are you? I don't know if that's like an invitation where they just want to like tell me all this stuff. So I try to like not to make that connection. I know it's bad, but it's just like some days where, especially July and June, like I don't want to make eye contact with you, because I know that the moment I do, it's gonna bring something up, and then automatically I'm gonna be put into that. And I do have a threshold. Like I could take a
Mm-hmm.
lot,
Yeah.
and but then I fall into a trap that I always fall into, which is I just go into fight mode, and then I don't even know I'm in fight mode until like a month later, where I'm like,
Right.
what's going on? Um, so that's hard. Maintaining balance, working in mental health is super hard. Um, and I see it too with like social workers, school counselors. There's high attrition rates just because they want to do the work, but their own um, assessment and their ability to actually follow through with the things that benefit them, they don't actually apply, or they can't. The application is no longer competing with the information coming through, because I don't know, there's just some situations like dealing with kids. There's certain things that I can deal with, and there's certain things that I can't deal with. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I try to stay away, just because I know that I'm not gonna, I'm not. There's certain kinds of evil that need to be put down, and maybe I'm wrong in saying that, but you just get to a point. I think I don't want to step on my toes here, but rehabilitating certain things that people have done, especially with like kids, is kind of hard, and I think it would take a miracle. Um, anyway, I can't get close to that because I know how I'm going to be with that, so I try to stay away from that. Even though that's, for some odd reason, that's like for the past like 2 years, that's kind of been like a prevalent thing with
Yeah.
abuse. So that's kind of like my my threshold there with kids. It's like I can't deal that. You're gonna have to find something else or someone else.
Yeah. It's okay to know your boundaries with things. You have to preserve your energy. It's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Even like when I go do home visits, it's like I get really bent out of shape because I know what that's like because I came from that. And I'm like, man, like I feel for these kids, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I say I don't know because the human domain, the human dimension is so vast and it's so complex, right? Where there's just days where it's like information that's hitting me is like I'm bulletproof. It's like bouncing off, and then there's some days where I can't I can't deal with it. But I guess that's part of the healing process, right? There's certain things that have changed. I think now too, having kids, that has changed my perspective quite a bit. I have stressors that I've never had before. I create scenarios that haven't happened just so that I can become numb to it. And I don't know if that's like a healthy coping mechanism. Um, I know we used to do worst case scenarios in training. So what's fascinating about like mimetics, right, is how information propagates and persists and has impact over time. And like the military is unique in the sense that we have all these old philosophies that have kind of become condensed into what they call warfighting, and then you have this kind of subliminal, like internal philosophy that guys adopt just from the reading list that they have, or just from warrior culture that they've adopted. And one of the more prevalent philosophies is from a book called Hagakure, which is it was a book written by this old dying samurai at the end of that age, and one of the passages, the guy is talking about how every day he meditates on being ripped apart by arrows and swords and being thrown off a cliff, because the way of the warrior is through death, and not just physical death, but there's a there's a certain level of acceptance that comes with that, so that you can do your job, which their job was to be retainers. Um, and so for me, it's okay if something happens to me, but if it happens to somebody else, I don't know if I could. And that was one of the things that I had to work through is trying to have healthy attachment, um, just because of my personal experience with um, death down range. So all those things are like novel to me now as I'm trying to um, balance out being a father now. That's weird.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally weird experience. I don't know who has it packed down. I tell you what though, I do look to like the other senior guys that I got to know, and I use them as examples of how they might go about doing things, and I talk to them a little bit about how they go about that. Um, and I think too is just like the work that I do is constant analyzing the environment, and again, that negativity bias, you're constantly looking at all the negative and you're just like, oh, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh shit, like when does this ever end? um yeah, I guess it's just the process. That is the work, right? um and that's yeah, so I'm trying to find balance there where not everything is impacting me. So yeah, that's a tool that I'm trying to develop, or skills that I'm trying to develop even more. I did, a little bit of disclosure, because I want to get to the point where none of this stuff bothers me as much. Um, recently, I've had a long history with the Department of Veteran Affairs, where when I did ask for help, I got denied, and then now, a decade later, I'm finally going through a TBI clinic on the 28th for just so a few months back, I went back And I let them know, it's like, look, there's stuff that I'm still dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go into my 40s dealing with the same stuff, right? Not that it's ever going to go away to the point where, it's like a complete eraser of my memory. But there are blockages. There are things that impact me.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to Polly quite a bit. And this right here, right? This is the work. This is the therapy in a sense, especially if you're able to apply something outside after, you receive that information that's kind of bad. But I don't want to go into my 40s with all this stuff. Not that I want to forget. I just don't want it to be like I get anniversary dates, I get blocked up. Um, there's just certain things that amp me up to the point where I want to react how I used to react, and it's not good. And like my body gets impacted by that, especially my back. Uh, Like whenever I want to get, violent for some odd reason, my back will mess up. Like it'll get tweaked, and then I can't even move. And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
is that psychosomatic? What's going on there? So again, I'm trying to work through it, and I know there's a lot of guys out there that are attempting to work through it as well. And it's not like I don't have it down to a science. And it's weird too because I have insights, maybe perspectives about what could work. So do other professionals, and yeah, I guess sometimes I just think I was like, man, is are other professionals as messed up as I am, right? Because it's just a lot. It's just so much. And I know I don't know if I should have said that, but I don't think other professionals are messed up. It's just a lot of damn work.
Yeah, everyone's carrying a lot. And I heard statistic earlier this year that in the first minute that we wake up, we're inundated with more information than our ancestors got in their whole life. And most of it's negative. So like we weren't created to be able to take on the amount of information that is thrown our way on any given day. So, whether or not someone has tough experiences that they're also working through, like our baseline is that we're getting thrown way more than we can actually process or deal with. So I think that's why this stuff is helpful. I think that therapy can feel daunting and you feel like you need to go through everything that happened. And these methods really get to the root source or the root belief or the root wound pretty quickly. So there's hope. I know a lot of people are scared to get started because they feel like they're going to be a volcano that just erupts everywhere. But these approaches really organize everything, or people are afraid to get started because they, if you're almost 40, how long do you have to be in therapy to go through 40 years of life? But it's not like a 1-for-1. And that's also what the energy work is really helpful too. So that's when you're in quantum power of things, right? So that also, I guess, to go back to the last answer, the energy work is really helpful there too, because if you're even just in the example of being a therapist, if you're a therapist helping people process trauma for 9 hours a day, you don't have 9 hours afterwards to like attend to yourself. So you have to learn what things are going to be the most powerful, the most effective, the quickest to, process what needs to be processed from that, integrate what needs to be integrated from that, and release what needs to be released from that. And so anyway, just sharing that because that's a big part of this work. My sessions are 90 minutes, which I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's a long time. I don't have 90 minutes. But in the grand scheme of things, I did that because like my art therapy groups were 2 hours. That was a good amount of time to really open up, dive into something, wrap up, process. A lot of times in clinical settings, they want to give you an hour to work with people one-on-one. But that's a lot of, opening up opening up, diving in, processing, and then you still need time to close up, process, integrate, be safe to leave. And you know, if you're going to be safe about the whole wrapping up aspect of it, it shortens the amount of time someone can be deep in, you know, what they haven't accessed before. So now that I work by myself and I can really control all these things, my sessions are 90 minutes because that's a really good amount of time to check in, see where someone's truly at that day. We have a full hour for an experiential that gets them deep into a theta state or deep into expressing their subconscious. And then we still have a good amount of time at the end to process whatever came up, help them make meaning from it, integrate it, and give them like solid takeaways. So you always feel like they have true shift and transformation from each session, which is really important.
Absolutely.
But anyway, there's hope with everything you brought up. Yeah, you're not alone.
Well, Roger that. Yeah. My sessions are usually 2 hours with my outside provider.
Okay, awesome.
With the VA, it's 1 hour, and those are tougher because
Yeah,
I don't know. It's like it's a huge process just going there,
exactly.
and then like, oh my God, it's like, here we go, and then I gotta go, and
Yeah.
then I can't do it. But the 2 hour stuff, yeah, that's a healthier for me. That's healthier. And I take it bit by bit. Like when I do like work, I have my own neural map, and I have it aged out, or like there's big events, and whenever I do sit down, I have a crap ton of journals that I writing is like my outlet. Um, and then that's where like I begin to not compartmentalize in a bad way, but stow it away.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I have a thought about something, or if I have a flashback, or if something is bothering me, or for some odd reason, this past year and a half, 2014, I keep getting like flashbacks from 2014, and and I go, why is that even a thing in my head right now? And that's something that I haven't processed yet, just because. And I've mentioned before in the past throughout this podcast that it's like 10 years of my life, or like in a fog almost.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm coming out of that fog, those 10 years went by so fast. And now that like I have time to think about things and go through
Mm-hmm.
them, it's like I'm getting more and more hits of it. So anyway, that's what I do is I go through that neural map, and boom, check mark, put it in, stow it away. Um, if I got to work through it, I usually do it through physical training, and not where I'm just like thinking about it repetitively. I try to like get the archetype out of it,
Mm-hmm.
where you know where I can slay it with the workout. It ends with the workout. Then I don't have to worry about it anymore. But again, that's like there's a lot of there's a lot of life experience. As we say in Hispanic culture, or at least amongst the Mexicans, these are Mexican people problems, or because everything is like a telenovela, like a soap opera. Everything is so
Mm-hmm.
dramatic. And so, yeah, spicy like our food, man. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I would just like to say, I think we're probably at a good point to wrap up. I would just like to say, I think it takes a special person to dedicate their life to trying to help people. So I appreciate you for that. And I know there's probably a lot of people, especially in the community, like we touched on earlier, that just won't, I don't want to say buy in, but that's what I'm going to call it. Like they're not going to buy into the idea that they can be helped by certain different things. But I would say you're wrong. I don't, this is tricky. Me and Jose talk about this a lot because it's like with this podcast platform, like we never wanted it to be like turn into like a woe is me type sob story where all we talk about is issues, that we have issues, poor, pitiful us. It's not that. And it's tricky sometimes in getting it to come across as different than that, but it's not that. It's just, we love having people that have different avenues to maybe help someone. And if you can let those walls down, or you are willing enough to believe that something can work for you if you're struggling, do it. Just do it. If you're worried, for me personally, of course everybody grows and changes. I've gotten to a point in my life where if I know something is positive for me, and someone in my close physical inner circle has critiques or judgments on that, I will release them from
Mm-hmm.
my life. I've just gotten to that point. And I know for a lot of people that can come across as like, maybe a bad thing, like, oh, you're I've been labeled an asshole several times in my life. That's just my personality type. But they would think of me that way instead of looking in the mirror and thinking, oh, how
Right.
maybe did I affect him in a wrong way? And it's to a point now where I used to want to explain that, to people, but I just don't anymore because my time is too valuable.
Right.
And so yeah, not to derail or take away from anything, but I think you're doing a great thing, and I think you've probably helped a tremendous amount of people, and I hope you get more, obviously, to help. But yeah, that's all we try to do here. So thank you. If Jose's all about setting up, kind of, I don't, what do you even call them? Like a webinar type portal where, if a lot of guys are interested in just hearing more about what you can offer, if we get feedback, maybe we can do something like that. Of course not. I know this is your profession and you deserve to earn a living helping people the way you do. So it's not like that. But if people just have questions they would like to ask you, I'm sure you'd probably welcome that down the line.
For sure.
So thank you. Appreciate your time and sharing that.
Thank
Yes.
you Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And if anyone is battling with anything they're having a hard time getting through, please reach out. So if people have questions, you can set up that webinar you were just talking about, and people can also, my website's www.flourishmomentum.com. You can contact me directly from there. I also have a YouTube channel with over 100 free yoga and meditation videos that people can access on YouTube and through there. I have free downloads, like libraries of free meditations that they can access from there. And then it also shares more about the different modalities I offer, and they can connect with me through there, or my email is jackie@flourishmomentum.com, and my Instagram is flourish_momentum. But any avenue that it takes for people to reach out with questions, I'm happy to answer them. I also, I don't even do first sessions with people until they have a free call with me. Sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's an hour, but that way someone can ask their questions, share kind of what's making them reach out to me, and we can come up with a game plan together. So we're not using our first session to do that. So we get all that done on a free call. And then once we have direction, we are able to really dive in and move forward. So I'm in the Chicagoland area for people who want to come in person, but I can do all the modalities I can do virtually as well. So yeah, I can work with people from anywhere. And I work with a lot of vets who are juggling life, like new careers, families, odd jobs, second things. So I'm really flexible. I meet with people when sometimes they call me from their cars, sometimes they call me from their office, sometimes they call me from their hotel room, sometimes they call me from their home. But we always make it work.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Jackie.